Following the success of Super Mario Bros., big boy Miyamoto started cooking up a sequel. Less than 9 months after the release of the original, Super Mario Bros. 2 was created. And though it was the second game, it was created more as an extension of the original, intended as an extra challenge for players that had mastered the first. However, the shitlords at Nintendo of America decided that it was too challenging and that it wouldn't sell well in North America. So this game would stay stuck in Japan, only releasing other regions years later through re-releases dubbed as The Lost Levels. 2 years later, America and Europe would release the true Super Mario Bros. 2. Except, not really. Yumi Kojo Doki Doki Panic, released in 1987, a year prior, exclusive to Japan. Miyamoto had large involvement in the development of this game, that's why it shares some elements from Super Mario Bros. So they took this game, swapped a few sprites around to Mario characters, then it was wrapped up and shipped off to America and sold as Super Mario Bros. 2. Some may argue that it's technically not a Mario game, and some would be right, partially. I mean, it wasn't originally conceived as a Mario game, but it shares a lot of DNA with the first game, and Miyamoto had a lot of involvement with the development and such. In a literal sense, it's not a Mario game, but spiritually, is it a good Mario game? And how does it stack up against the true Super Mario Bros. 2? This game feels like Mario had eaten one too many mushrooms and then proceeded to have a bad trip. I just get bad vibes from this game, man. Like, from a technical standpoint, this game is visually more complex, but sometimes it just looks bad. There are exceptions where the game can look pretty, but it's consistently overshadowed with how drab the game's colour palette can be at times. I will give the game credit for making each world unique though, sticking to a particular theme. Practically the same as the original, with a handful of new sprites. These new sprites are nothing groundbreaking though, and before I criticise the lack of innovation here, I will reiterate this game was never really trying to be a full-blown sequel, and frankly, I prefer the visual style of The Lost Levels over Super Mario Bros. 2. Everything pops here. I'm not saying it looks good, but you have visual clarity everywhere, and for a game that's just a bare bones platformer, that's all you really need. Unfortunately, this game doesn't retain that same liberating sense of momentum from the original. The controls are good and snappy, but the strength of the first game is lost here. Jumping is no longer your bread and butter. Jumping on top of an enemy's head does nothing. You'll have to jump on top of them and then flip them upside down. Then you can throw them. It's kind of bizarre, but not bad. At least you now have the option to fight from a range. Just rip stuff up out of the ground and chuck it at the enemy. Admittedly, it is really satisfying to land on top of the eggs mid-air and then sling them right back at the birdo. Unlike the first game, there is some variety in the boss fights here, but they all still boil down to pick this up and throw it. In this game, the screen still scrolls smoothly horizontally, but the game freezes and screen swaps for any major vertical movements, which can be jarring and throw you off. You lose that consistency. Considering so many levels in this game are towering vertical labyrinths, it seriously makes the game frustrating when you're trying to avoid an obstacle or an enemy, but instead the game must load the next section of the stage instead of registering your input. I am more than aware this is due to the limitations of the hardware it's on, but come on man, you work with what you have, and if what you have isn't good enough to make the gameplay smooth, then maybe the game's design needs some reworking. This game's mechanics, yet again, are running and jumping, and stop me if you've heard this one. Refer back to my review of the first game. This game keeps everything that made that game great. Moving on. Now this game is plagued with inconsistency. It's always a fun section followed by a snooze fest of traversing uninteresting caves. Constantly I'll play one level and think, oh, that wasn't too bad. Then the game immediately follows up with the right hook of boredom. The straightforward platforming stages are fun. These are usually just get from one end of the stage to the other. Then there's these stages where you have to navigate through different doorways and stuff, and you're unlikely to become stuck or lose track of where you're going, but to me it's just boring, especially when you know there's another genuinely fun level looming in the distance. The game doesn't control poorly or anything, but for some reason it just doesn't really feel as good when you're running at full speed as the original, likely due to full speed just being a standard movement speed now. There's no sprint button, you're stuck at a static pace. Makes the platforming a lot easier, And honestly, I think the controls might be a little bit tighter here than the original, but they're nowhere near as fun. This is purely my opinion, and it's hard to explain. You need to just play it yourself to understand. It's the same as the original, yeah, except now some hidden little intricacies from the first game are now mandatory to progress, such as invisible blocks and climbing up the extending vines. There are also now poison mushrooms. They're basically the same sprite, just a different colour. Let me tell you, getting a genuine mushroom in this game is a godsend. Having a free hit is like the second coming of Christ. Is the game difficult? Well... yes, this game is hard. Hard as nails. But frankly, the game is just as engaging as the original. The original had a few difficulty spikes, especially in the later worlds. This game is quite literally as if the difficulty from World 8 followed into this game's World 1. You will die. You'll die a lot, actually. I mean, in fact, I wouldn't recommend playing this unless you have an infinite lives cheat on. This game will kick the shit out of you, it's no joke. But the only parts that consistently frustrate me are the levels where the layout will loop over and over and over until you take the correct route. You have to run over a specific platform in a row of several in order to progress. Otherwise you end up repeating significant chunks of these checkpointless castle stages. It sucks and it bogs down the pacing of the game. The difficulty flickers up and down, only really becoming consistently hard after World 7. Now, get ready for potentially the worst take you've ever heard. I think that this game is harder than the Lost Levels. Maybe not in a literal sense, maybe the actual level design of the Lost Levels is more challenging. But I had a blast playing the Lost Levels. I maybe died more, in fact I definitely died more. But I always felt the urge to run right back and try that stupid fucking dumbass jump again. Sometimes, the randomness of the enemy's movement patterns in Super Mario Bros. 2 will seriously throw you off. Those sections where you have to outrun the Femto mask while holding a key will seriously make you burst a blood vessel. You know why? Because it's not fun. That's why.
If it's not fun, why bother?
Exactly. Every time I died in this game, I looked at the clock and wondered why I was still playing it. This game has much more forgiving checkpoints, and it always brings you back in with all your hit points as opposed to shrinking you back down. Regardless, I'd still rather go and play the Lost Levels. At least then my deaths are because the game is genuinely difficult, not because my patience is dwindling and I'm bored out of my mind. For all its downfalls, you can't deny that this game pioneered a lot of Mario's mainstays like the Shy Guys, the Porkies, Bob-ombs and Birdos. This game actually received a lot of praise from critics for being so different from the original, but in my opinion, it differed in all the wrong areas. From an objective standpoint, I don't think the game is bad, but I've been spoiled by more modern platformers with their richer worlds and more exciting movement. So I was surprised when revisiting the original game when I found out that the movement was so well executed. Like I said, this game was never really trying to be a full-blown sequel, but this is a comparison, and I've dunked on Super Mario Bros. 2 enough. So I'll give it this round and this round only. Well, The Lost Levels does add Luigi as a separate character with his own unique physics as opposed to just the sprite swap that was featured in the first game. So that's something, right? Super Mario Bros. 2 has 4 separate characters, all with different physics. So the American Super Mario 2 innovated more. But did it? It wasn't even originally meant to be a Mario game, more so a spiritual successor turned Mario game. So, in conclusion, which one do I think is better? Go on. I'll give you 3 guesses. In my humble opinion, I believe The Lost Levels absolutely thwarts the American version of Super Mario Bros. 2. The way I see it, they're both frustrating, but at least one is fun to control. Truthfully, I wouldn't even recommend either of these games unless you're a die-hard fan of the original. Then I'd say you owe it to yourself to at least try The Lost Levels. Like I said though, whack an infinite lives cheat on, save yourself the hassle. Games are supposed to be fun. However, the original still reigns supreme. Neither of its successors were able to surpass the confident simplicity and masterful design of the first. Though technically, neither of these games were a true successor. The Lost Levels was more of an extension of the original, and Super Mario Bros. 2 wasn't even developed as a Mario game, so what is the true successor to the original?
Ah, yes. Well, that will have to wait for another day.
Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay tuned.